What is going on, you guys? It's your boy, the Keto Chondriac here, and we are back with episode 131 of the video game therapy series. I'm here at my ocean monument, just junglifying it up. I just finished a Let's Play episode for the first time in a while, so hopefully that comes out pretty soon once I finish editing. But yeah, I got some stuff to talk about today. The first one's kind of a hot take of mine, and is not a position I expect to be popular or even just, I'll say, even rational. It's just very much an opinion piece, meaning that understandably you can disagree with this, and you're not wrong per se. It's not something I have a moral. I guess the argument is somewhat moral, but it's unserious, I suppose. This being that I think the age for getting a tattoo, so like the minimum age, like the minimum age for, a car loan is 25. I think drinking is 21. It depends on the country or whatever. But, in the United States, it's like 25 for a car loan, 21 for drinking. I think the age for a tattoo should be 35. And because, like a tattoo on anybody that is under that, your skin isn't shitty yet. You don't have bad skin. Your skin's generally fine, unless you have like psoriasis or something, which you definitely don't want to be, covering yourself in ink then if you have, a genuine skin condition. But otherwise, if you don't, what is the point of it? I understand that people get them for like, to remember grandma or whatever, but why would you need, do you really need something tattooed on your skin to remember grandma? That would just tell me that grandma wasn't that important to you, because the only way you're going to remember her is if there's a stupid, an emblem of some kind, a rose or a sail or something. I don't even know what the fuck people do with these stupid tattoos or why they have them. But it's just bizarre. I genuinely think the age for tattoos should be like 35. And the only way it really looks cool, in my opinion, is if again, you have maybe a few gray hairs. You have to have seen some shit, I guess, to put it that way, before I think it's normal for you to get a tattoo of any kind. I think an 18-year-old, an impressionable 18-year-old getting these edgy tattoos is just that, is someone trying to be edgy or just trying to find their place in the world. And I don't think permanently putting an ugly fish or something on their bicep is going to help them solve their identity crisis. Who has come out of a tattoo shop and now understands who they are because of a tattoo? Nobody. That has never happened, and that will never happen. So it's just pointless. You're making people I know there's like a kink. Some people have kinks for people with tattoos, but besides, again, weird people, that have kinks, and I'm just gonna call them weird because I think it's weird. It's weird to me, at least. Nobody wants to see all that, right? Nobody wants you covered in ink and stuff, unless again you look like a veteran or something. Which at that point it's more badass than it is good looking. Your skin's fucked up. You got a little bit of gray hair. I think people should wait until well into their 40s, to be covering themselves in tattoos and things. And I've seen this even with like moms too. Like you go like 60 years without a tattoo, and then all of a sudden they get like a little cross on their ankle or something, which is you know if the point is, everybody does that. So it's like you're not different for doing that. You're not like, oh, well, I'm a normal mom except I have a little tattoo. Every single mom has the little tattoo on their ankle. There's not a single one that doesn't. And the ones that don't actually are, again, they're generally cooler because they're not trying to be different or weird. And I know there's a crisis element to people getting strange tattoos, and it's something like a pseudo permanent, or I guess in some ways it is kind of permanent. To try to dig themselves out of some kind of hole, but it never does anything. It's just it's like being a alcoholic for 6 months. I'm sure you'll change, but are you going to change in a way that's good, or at all permanent or meaningful? No, you're probably going to make this just isn't the right kind of change that you need to make. It's not, your life isn't perfect, but you're missing a tattoo. That describes nobody ever. You're only kind of getting it out of some kind of desperate heave to do something, or I don't know. Again, it doesn't make any sense to me why somebody under 35 would get a tattoo. So my kind of law with this would be, we would change the legal age to be 35. Because again, at that point, maybe you've seen enough to have warranted you getting a tattoo. But it's just bizarre that people, are 18 getting these tattoos and they look terrible. Like on women, they look awful. On dudes, you just look like a little baby. Besides like the shit on your face. And yeah, sure, maybe if you're a gangster or something, you can whatever. Maybe it's different for maybe I'm just talking to white people here because there is maybe a little bit of a difference between tattoos on black people versus white people, or people with darker skin. I suppose you could be Hispanic or Indian or something, and it be a little different. But I'm maybe mostly targeting white people with this. Uh, yeah, so I'm not sure if that qualifies as something that's racist or not, but whatever. The point is, you shouldn't be getting tattoos until you're old, because it just looks bad. Or if you're black. But anyway, I'll move on to something else here. That was just my opinion. Yeah, this is something that I saw that really, I guess, bothered me. So obviously, centralization is something that is happening on the internet. That's no, you have to be living under a rock not to see that. But I saw something that was almost like a new level of scummy, in my opinion. So Amazon has like affiliate sites, right? You can sign up as like an affiliate person on Amazon, and you can sell whatever again on their site. But now instead of like if you wanted to like there's normally a little button or a link that'll say like who's selling this or whatever. But instead of like, if I was maybe I'm selling shoes on Amazon, but I also sell them on shoes.com. It's just nobody goes to shoes.com or fine, myshoes.com. Because I'm sure shoes.com is a big domain. But myshoes.com or bucketshoes.com. Sure, no one goes there, but my people will go on Amazon and then discover my site. But now, like instead of Amazon just directly linking to their site, which would improve the visibility of the site, it would improve the search engine ranking so that people who looked up bucket shoes or something similar might be able to stumble upon my site. Amazon now opens like the site within Amazon. So it's like Amazon.com, but it has like a shell around your site. And not only is this like insulting to like the people who are trying to get SEO bumps, on Amazon, but it's also just a emblematic of the web bloat that we've now because I'm sure in order to actually render that, you need like not only like is the Amazon site itself, and Amazon's maybe it's like kind of optimized, so it's like sure a kind of a big hefty corporate React app or something, and then you're going to render another one inside of that, so you have like these nested React apps that I'm sure are eating up, and I didn't look at the I guess I should have looked at like the actual size of that web page, or looked at the memory being used by my browser, because I'm sure it'd be like just an astronomical amount. Just because the conceptual idea of nesting React apps, just so Amazon doesn't let you leave their site is really the ultimate goal of it. Is that you now can't leave Amazon's site. You have to stay on their site because you're viewing bucket shoes through Amazon.com. Which Amazon's going through all that extra compute just so you can stay on their site. Because they can show you ads and stuff in the sidebar or whatever. I just think that's ultimately, it's just so insulting to, I guess the sites themselves who, they built a site. Now Amazon pretty much just stole it. Maybe there's a legal argument, to be made, for that site. But also just the whole moral argument and the bloat argument. There's like 10 different ways in which this is just an all around bad thing. But I don't know. I just wanted to mention that as something horrible that I saw recently. But we'll move on to something else here instead of sticking with the bad stuff. I've tried doing this, but it doesn't work. Well, I mean, I don't mean to say it doesn't work, period, but it didn't work for me. So maybe if you're, I guess, better than me, it might work for you. But I had this idea of like, normally I meditate, at least once a day. I've used to do it like a lot of times a day, but that was, I guess different situations because it's all very circumstantial. A lot of times your habits become, your environment. If you lived in a place for 10 years and you've had habits there, they're much harder to break than if you moved and made new habits. But either way, the habit I have here is generally only meditating once a day towards the end of the day. And generally I don't really, like I've said before, my goal with my like meditative thing is not to like do a breathing exercise or to like battle my demons or whatever it is that people, these grifters will, weaponize meditation for. Because the point isn't to like, again, use it as a weapon against yourself to like, I don't even know. I mean, some people, they just view things very strangely, right? I'm not meditating to make more B2B SaaS sales, or to drive more traffic to my Amazon, nested web page or whatever the fuck. But either way, something I've tried doing, which again I'm saying doesn't work, is to spend the night before when I meditate to then try to meditate what my day would look like tomorrow. So for example, let's say I got in a bad streak which has happened before. I'm not saying this is a real example, uh, of waking up late. So normally instead of waking up at 7:30 or at 8, which is kind of the acceptable, you're not a bum time to wake up. Whereas once like 10 or 9:30 hits, it's like, all right, you know, you're officially a bum now. If you get out of bed at 10 o'clock, you're a loser, right? Even if you are employed or whatever, it's just you're being lazy, and that isn't like, I'm not saying that that's my opinion. That's just kind of that's just my emotional reaction to when you wake up. So if I get out of bed at 10 a.m., I immediately feel like a loser. And my day is already kind of off to a bad note. So my strategy was like, all right, well, if I am thoughtful and I meditate the night before, what exactly am I going to do tomorrow, hour by hour, day by day? So all right, I'll wake up at 8 o'clock, and I have to I'm going to go outside and go for a walk, and then I'm going to come back, cook breakfast, whatever. I tried doing that for a couple days, and not once did I actually I guess do what I thought. And then because I had like thought about it and had like in this case almost even tried to weaponize meditation so that I'd get out of bed at the respectable hour. You'd think that like I because I got off on the wrong foot immediately, like then my whole day was almost off to the wrong start, right? Because I had spent it was only 10 minutes of meditation, but at least time being thoughtful about, all right, I'm going to get out of bed and do this and then do this and do this, and then immediately I sleep in an extra hour, and then I'm like, all right, well, I'm all fucked. And then like it's either I try to get back on track, which is hard, I guess, if you're budgeting time properly and not leaving these big open gaps. But you're just psychologically you're already out of the game, right? Because I already botched the wake up time. Either way, my idea was to meditate my entire day tomorrow, the night before, as to really, I guess, help me in some way, but it didn't work. So I guess that's just a failed strategy. And maybe if you're better than me, again, it might work for you, but I just wanted to share that didn't work for me. So I know, maybe in a different circumstance or if a different habit, I guess different context, I might, have responded differently, but regardless, that's where I ended up today. But anyway, I suppose on a similar note with, I guess people being better than me, or in theory, whatever. Sometimes and this is just kind of maybe this whole like main character syndrome, which is, is very much exacerbated by social media and just everything that comes with that. People feeling the need to share, intimate details, like on, for example, if they have a Minecraft YouTube channel and they, spend hours and hours talking to themselves, they might suffer a little bit from this main character syndrome. I'm joking, of course. Well, not really. Either way, social media has definitely made that kind of main character problem much, much worse. But something I was I guess contemplating on was that because of that, and maybe this is just more of a being online thing, and I'm not on social media, I'm not. So even just kind of thinking about even like my friends and people that I haven't talked to in a while, or whoever, and people that I knew at one point, and I'm like wondering, oh, what are they doing? What are they up to? Sometimes it feels like everybody besides me is in like the place that they should be. So even suppose that I have a friend, Bob, that is an unemployed loser. In my eyes, Bob is still like, that is kind of that's the role he's supposed to fill at this time. It's like, maybe I don't think of him as a perpetually unemployed loser, but like to me, it like that, it's kind of, that adds up, right now. Right. I'm not looking at other people and being like, well, they're not exactly in the, the spot where I thought they'd be, or they're not where they're supposed to end up. I almost kind of assume and feel that they're like, oh, they are where they should be. Right. Which, then is the problem. It's like, all right, well then am I where I should be? And oftentimes it's like, well, not really, or no. Which is, I think which is really the result I came down with. Is that often everyone feels like everyone's in their exact spot except for me. Which of course isn't really true because everyone is in their own, like, is going through their own journey, their own time periods, and their own benchmarks, of things, good and bad. It's not like I'm only saying that everyone else is doing perfect except for me. Because there certainly is, there's certainly some element to, you only having your own personal experience to draw upon, and then you thinking about other people and being like, well, they're kind of in their correct spot except for me. I'm not. I'm still working towards some other spot. Whereas, if I was able to see through Bob's eyes, Bob, of course, wouldn't see himself as the unemployed loser, but again, to me, he's fulfilling the perfect role, which is, he's currently an unemployed loser, which is what I would see him as. And, so you kind of see people as what they are, and you do kind of discount maybe what they should become or will become, or, their own specific journey, which I think is just an externality of, I guess only having one lived experience, so only having, I guess I'm not saying, this is not like a complete like sociopathic thing where it's impossible. Like I can't conceptualize someone else's experience, but just the tendency in general is to just dismiss other people's, I guess, personal like journeys and assume that like where they are is where they should be. But whereas I don't do that same thing for myself. And these are even like friends that are doing well and bad. So people that are doing well is all the same thing. It's sort of like, well, they're exactly where they should be. They deserve everything where they at. And people that aren't doing well, it's the same thing. Where it's not. I don't discriminate based off of like who's doing well and who's not. There certainly isn't any element of that. Because that could be sociopathic. I could imagine that turning into something problematic. If you're just wishing, even your friends to do poorly. But even the friends that are doing well and have are living out their dreams or whatever, it often it comes as no surprise to you. Whereas they themselves, it's like, well, might have been unlikely or something. But it's easy for, I don't know, it's easy for you to get locked into your own experience. Maybe the whole point of this, whole, I'm circling back to the point being that, it is, we have a tendency to get locked into our own, I guess, solipsist projection on, where you're at and I guess what stage of life that you're at and what you're going through. It's easy to get kind of to forget that everyone is their own individual person. People aren't as like everyone's on their own, journey, so to speak. I hate that I sound like a like a meditation mom or something or a wine mom, but truly it is like that. And especially at a young age, there's no point in having any kind of panic or regret, despite not being where you are, because things do take a long time to materialize, and even these overnight successes are never that, which is not. It's just common knowledge. I'm not saying anything new with that, but either way, I'll move on to something else here. Um, so I said one time that I would here. Let me just do this. I said one time that I would. I say that on my little text document here that I have haikus that which are pretty much just little blurbs that help me remember what it is that I was meant to talk about. And then I kind of use those as a starting point to actually talk about the things. And I lovingly refer to them as haikus, although they are not actually written as haikus. But generally they're not. But I translated a few of them into legitimate haikus just for the sake of fun, because I thought it'd be, I guess, just a more interesting way to to introduce the topics I talk about instead of just, seeing it on the text document and ranting it out. But anyway, let's see. I'll start with my first one here, and then I'll kind of get into what the meaning of them are. Because with haikus, so if you're not familiar with haikus, it is a poem, or I guess a way to write things. They're generally referred to as poems or something similar. Limericks, I guess, are pretty short, but it's 5 syllables, then 7 syllables, and 5 syllables. They're 3-line poems. Or if this, I guess, yeah, I guess they're poems. That's probably the best way to put it. But yeah, they're 5, 7, 5, 7, 5 is the thing. So oftentimes they're very interpretable because you only really get 17 syllables to work with. So a lot of these compound words that might be descriptive are not. You can't use them, or at least you can't use them very well because that takes up most of your budget. But the point is that they're supposed to be interpretable and, I guess say a lot with a little. But either way, I'll start with my first haiku. By sacrifices made, judgment of society, prudence or virtue. Now, that is obviously very, very interpretable. And some of these I did that on purpose. But I was thinking about like how should I say it's like society itself be judged, or so how should civilizations or societies, or however you want to phrase it, be judged on the merits of their success. So you might say that there's some objective measure to say that the Roman Empire was quote unquote more successful than, I don't know, some obscure Chinese place. I don't know. Again, you pick whatever other civilization that you want. And duration is something that's very common with this. Is like the duration of the empire that is the measure of success. Or sometimes it's like the amount of democracy that is in there is also the measure of success, which again is kind of is not really, kind of depends, what you might call democracy, and there's just a lot more that goes into it. It's not just the amount of democracy that makes it something good, uh, you know. Or some people, is how close was it to communism? All right, well, the more communist it was, the more successful it was. Regardless, there's all these different metrics under which people can assess how successful different societies are. So you could say that, or you could say just that the ones that are alive now are the most successful, and that's it. That's kind of this recency bias where it's like, all right, well, America's around right now, so it's therefore the most successful society of all time. Uh, you know, uh, Discounting, of course, any kind of, you don't know what the future holds. So it's like, all right, it seems like kind of a silly, uh, I guess, philosophy to adhere yourself to. But either way, I was thinking about how we could judge societies, agnostic of time, or just take time out of the equation. And I think the amount of sacrifice that one makes on the grounds of, I'll say, like the philosophical ideal or the philosophical ideals of said society. So suppose that, like, I guess America's, as an example, would be built on the philosophical principles of, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's like, okay, well then, with the application of, this society's laws and its rules, and not even just the ideas of the laws, the actual implementation. So like these are the actual presidents and the actual people running it. How much, I guess not even how much, but to what extent are the philosophies sacrificed in order for the society to function? Meaning, how close are the ideals and the actual function of, said society? I think it, is there's a again there's not a lot to quantify with that, but I do think kind of judging a society based off the amount that you sacrifice in philosophy for practicality is a decent measure of the success of one's society. So again, the haiku that I wrote to portray this little blurb was, by sacrifices made, judgment of society, prudence or virtue. Um, so again, it's the point being, the more closely that a society can actually implement the philosophy under which the society is, built upon, the more successful that society is. Meaning that even if, like, that means that, like, hypocritical societies, so ones that are talk all about freedom and like we're the best or something, but is like a fascist regime where everyone died of starvation. There's obviously a giant leaps between the philosophy itself and that. Whereas, like, even if, like, let's suppose the philosophy was that, like, all right, we're just Nazi communists or something. It's like, all right, fine. Well, so then what? To what degree different is the actual functioning than, like, a legitimate Nazi communist place? So it's like it's like the difference between the expectations and the reality of said society. So it's like if the expectations are low and it's executed. So even like like a tribal society of sorts, like a hunter gatherer thing, their philosophy isn't like to conquer nations, right? Or like to develop technologies. So you can't say that, like, they're a failure because they're not develop. Like, that's not part of their philosophy. Like, that's not like what they're doing with their life. Their life, their philosophy, again, might be reductive. Would be like to, be one with nature and to, I guess, like, care for the families that you have. And sure, these are not like mathematically genius philosophies to have, but regardless, like, the actual functioning societies is quite similar to what their philosophies are, like, in terms of things that they don't do. And maybe you could even argue that their philosophy is almost non-existent, which at that point still it's like, all right, well, there's still, I guess the less philosophy you're tying yourself to, the more freedom you have, within it, to still be considered a success. So I'm not saying that the answer here is to have a society with no underlying principles. Therefore, can be, technically anything is successful. I think in order to have a society, you have to have some kind of structure, and then based off of how viable those are, in the long term, with number of people and the resources and the timing of everything, then how accurate, how much overlap is there between the actual day to day functioning and those principles. Um, so by that logic, you could compare a small hunter gatherer tribe, with their underlying philosophy of, like, one with nature and a simple life, and caring for, egalitarianism or something like that. Sure. You can compare that with like the Roman Empire and like what their, principles and things are. And there is a certain like, I realize that philosophies of societies do change, and there's not like, the Romans weren't like, someone didn't come out and write one document that then everyone kind of committed to, which is, I guess, more similar to what happened in America, where there's like a few documents that kind of make up everything, and then you read those documents and you're like, all right, I kind of I get the point of what this is supposed to be. Now how long is it like that, or to what extent is it actually like that, is the measure of success. But regardless, there's a few documents that kind of lay that out, whereas not every society had that. A lot of it's like more contextual, and you kind of got to make assumptions on things. But regardless, I was just interesting in the thinking about the degree at which you sacrifice philosophy for practicality or functioning, that you could measure or compare the relative success of societies. Anyway, I guess this is a haiku about haikus. This next one, so I guess strap in. Uh, Poem or idiot? I am not one to assess. Words aren't just words. So I'll read that again. Poem or idiot? I am not one to assess. Words aren't just words. And I may have sometimes I've fucked up the syllables, just because I pronounce them, but I'm pretty sure these are all 575. This is a haiku about haikus, meaning that words are, kind of infinitely interpretable, and this is kind of almost the underlying issue with, even like any kind of formal system, meaning like mathematics as a formal system, or even the language of chemists or physicists, is that they all use a language of some kind that is infinitely interpretable, and you're never going to be able to understand like even your concept of blue versus my concept of blue are two different things. And sure, you can maybe wire them to or I guess consider them similar parts of the brain or something, or but I kind of almost disagree with this eventual reductionist argument where it's like, we'll understand that the color blue is this set of firing neurons, within a brain, where it's like, well, I still don't think that the same, like even with two people recognizing the same color blue, the same neurons are not going to fire. There's just a certain subjectivity to the human brain that we won't ever be able to understand. So there's not any amount of objectivity that we can bring to something like even neurons firing. If that's even the level that of parity that we need to assess what things are. I don't know. Either way, this just means words can mean anything depending on who's saying what and when they're saying it, and again, context. This is not a new idea. Let's see. This one's about philosophers. Not again. I kind of don't like that word, and don't like to be. I don't like to associate with that word. And maybe this haiku, exemplifies that a little bit. A philosopher, not home among them, he knows, solitary thought. The premise of this being that philosophers, by their very nature, should not feel at home among them. Like, I think that might be different, amongst people of similar things, like, doctors being together, or lawyers being together, or chemists being together. Sure, they might, operate in different parts of the law, or different kinds of medicine, or they might be interested in different chemicals, if it is something like that. But a lot of times it is comforting to at least be around an audience that, knows similar things, or at least gets similar references. And philosophers, while they may never call themselves philosophers, I would be skeptical of anybody that does. They might get the same references, but a lot of times they're part of, I guess, being into philosophies of any kind makes you just almost so opinionated, such that you don't like the musings of other philosophers. It's really a very solitary thing, right? Whereas I think the true philosopher, the one who thinks for themselves and is pursuant of truth, again, independent of other people's, independent of even scientific inquiry or other people's, conclusions and insights, is really the true philosopher. Whereas, a chemist or something is very much built on the knowledge of other people. But, many of these, even we'll say even successful philosophers who've created, again, frameworks for thinking about different schools of philosophy or what have you, a lot of them don't require a whole studying of all the other classics. Now, it might save them time in the long term, as to not come to the same conclusions about, the futility of the world or whatever. Again, those are all kind of subjective conclusions as well. Uh, but there certainly is no requirement that you have to have studied anything. Whereas, like, if you want to be a chemist and you've never taken a chemistry class and you have no concept of the history of chemistry or any knowledge of anything beneath that, it's going to be kind of hard for you to then invent. You kind of have to invent chemistry. Whereas you never really have to invent a philosophy. You just have to start thinking and start, being honest and I guess start feeling and then thinking about those feelings. And then kind of, creating words and ideas that kind of match and collect those things into, I guess digestible, bits of wisdom. You don't have to be, classically trained, in the same way a physicist might need to be classically trained, even just to use the machinery that they'd have to do studies with. Whereas philosophers can literally just think, and that's kind of all the equipment that they need is their brain and like, time for solitary thought. So I thought it was interesting that, I think philosophers are unique in the sense that, among other philosophers, they wouldn't really feel at home. Whereas I think, maybe they might get references, but they wouldn't feel at home the same way, fellow doctors amongst fellow doctors or, lawyers or whoever, might have, more in common to speak up. Or at least they have a shared base of knowledge. Whereas philosophers, kind of the whole point is that you're not just like, you have to create something new. You have to put a new philosophy out there that's your philosophy, and you have to kind of believe in it no matter what. And there's not any amount of like, I guess you can add flavors to other people's philosophy, but at that point, are you really a philosopher if you're not thinking for yourself? That's kind of the whole appeal of it, to a certain extent, is that it is truly individualistic, whereas like a doctor is not. I guess there's like holistic medicine or something, but most of those people are quacks and not like respected. There's not been a respected doctor who has had no medical training. I suppose again in the modern world, maybe there's ancient doctors that were quacks that were respected, but they were still quacks by today's standards. But anyway, yeah. So that's about philosophers and solitary thought. Let me move on to a different one here. I'm gonna scroll down on my list. All right. Yeah. All right. This next one, I guess I'll just read it and then go from there. Innate human drives, life by their number and force, self-control decides. So this is just thinking about, again, this is kind of a meta thought about how humans operate in, I guess, determining or narrowing down a number and a intensity of, I'll say, like, just innate human drives, can dictate kind of the power or the I guess the strength of that relative human. So like different I said animalistic drives almost. You have this drive for eating and sleeping and procreating, and there's a social drive. There's almost this kind of empty aspirational vessel too. And maybe this is like, kind of a leftover gene from like the conquering days, where I think in a lot of, and this isn't just males, but males and females have this like, desire or want to put something out into the world, or to add something to the world or make some kind of appreciable difference. And there's certainly some void, if not, because otherwise it's like, I think there would be a lot of, nobody would be depressed just doing nothing and like ordering DoorDash and just being a piece of shit. But there's a reason people like that shame still kind of exists within our genetics. Like we feel shame if we don't, if we know we're not, I guess adding or contributing or, meaningfully doing what our bodies allow us to do. Kind of reaching the peak of our flourishing, or at least pursuing that, even if we never accept that we've reached it. But I think categorizing the strength and the intensity of different drives can help us, or at least not even really help anything, but it is an interesting way to try to think about how different people operate. So, I suppose some people have, obviously some people have, sex drives that are higher than others. And that creates differences in behavior. That's quite obvious. But I think it'd be interesting to try to entirely categorize and think about all of the different kind of innate desires, and then figure out some way to rank them, or to figure out, I guess, how intense that desire is. Beside people just like, oh, out of 10, how horny are you? which is, again, never a helpful thing. It's like, because your 8 and my 8 are two different things. When it comes to everything, not even just horniness, there are completely different, echelons of, the whole self-surveying thing is so pointless, and stupid. But regardless, I think there's maybe some better way to do it than that. But there isn't. It is kind of hard to measure, I guess, people's relative, like, suppose we tried to quantify this empty vessel of ambition that I spoke of. How do you determine if one is stronger than the other? Like, by the amount that they have accomplished? Like, maybe not. Because then I guess the lack of accomplishment could be compensated for in, depression or shame, which then it's like, all right, well, then how do you decide who's more depressed than another one? And it's like ultimately dealing with these mental ailments that are just like impossible to, science doesn't really do a great job of helping people with this. Besides, like, I suppose, like, there's, drugs to treat depression and things are all based around this, like, chemical imbalance theory, which, again, never really permanently solves any problem. It just makes them dependent on drugs, which, again, some people might be helpful, in certain contexts, especially if it's, the illness is debilitating. But we certainly haven't solved depression, scientifically. We just kind of, well, your serotonin receptors suck. And it's like, okay, well, then, why? Why did that happen? Could it be because of this, this vessel of ambition is left, is too full, or there's just, there's some mechanism that's creating stress, or, is leading to depressive symptoms. I don't know. There's just a lot. It's just a different way to think about, or consider, I guess not even really the mental health approach, but even just understanding mentalities. It's not about, like, fixing problems. If, like, oh, well, if you're not as ambitious as we'd like as a society, it's like, that wouldn't be the point of me even thinking about this. The point would be, like, can we understand differences in, psychology, or, maybe the life philosophy, or just even just the minutia of daily ins and outs and desires based off of, I guess, how strong and how many impulses are acting on it, a given person at a time. So, like, I would say, for example, for me, some people just, like, their whole life is about, like, pussy. And I understand, like, to some degree, like, we were all 14 once. And for men, this is different. I guess I'm just talking to the males here. I imagine there's not many female bucketheads. But regardless, there's people that I know that are, the moment they turn 13 and, like, the first drop of testosterone entered their body, they have only ever thought about box. And now they're, like, 25, and that's still their primary and sole focus. And the amount of, like, effort and time that goes in, and this is not any fault of those people at all. I understand there's, like, it's, testosterone is a very powerful chemical. But that drive just isn't as strong with me. And maybe maybe I have low T or something. I don't know. I should probably get my T tested. But regardless, there's people that just, like, have this seemingly insatiable desire. Maybe it's just this, like, goonification of culture. Or there's some, other addiction or problem that's not being addressed. But regardless, like, clearly their, sexual desires are on a completely different echelon than me. And if there's any way to at least understand or categorize that, I think that'd be helpful for them, to at least know, what these, strong desires are. Whereas, like, for me, there's other things that really occupy my attention. So, like, my health, I guess not my sexual health, I suppose I don't really think about it that way, but my physical health, just what I'm eating, exercising, like, this is a compulsive thought of mine, to the same extent where some people just, all they think about is, how am I getting laid next? And there's not even any, what's beyond that doesn't matter. There's just, to me, but, that health, I guess, desire or passion or interest or, drive, I suppose, is much more pronounced. And I think different people have different pronounced desires. And some people just are low across the board, right? It's almost like this, you could think about, like, the 5-factor model for psychology, where it's like, the open conscientiousness, openness to experience, I don't even know I forgot the other ones, ocean or whatever it is, openness, consciousness, I don't even know, whatever. The point is, you could almost think about it the same way. It's like, all right, well, how strong is their sexual desire? How strong is their social desire? What about their physical, desires? And some of these could be maybe, like, proxy tested through, chemicals like, serotonin. There's, like, I guess a kind of a chemical test for depression. But how often are people getting their brain scanned for the amount of serotonin in their brain? They're not. They're just saying, I feel like shit. And the doctor's like, all right, well, your serotonin's probably low. So here's, just take this, which I think is silly, just to not ever, like, do any kind of quantifiable test, anything. It's just like, well, if they're saying it's this, they're probably sad or something. Um, it's just not a very, it's not really even scientific. I suppose it's, scientific in the sense that it's a chemical solution, but it's not a smart one. It's not, not a robust thing. They're not really targeting the soul, problem, or at least, they're not narrowing it down at all. They're just kind of giving you a chemical. But either way, I was just thinking about the different desires and thing. And I guess I was also just considering people that were, because I can't conceptualize this like, pussy rotted mindset where people are just so obsessed with like how to get sexual intercourse that it just takes up so much real estate in their mind, and their emotions and their relationships are all occupied by this like sexual thing. And then it's like, maybe they have sex and they're like, then they're normal for like a day. And then they're back to the same like horny goblin the day. And it's like, I'm wondering, not that, testosterone's good. Like, yes, go to the gym to get, release or whatever. But like, isn't there some limit to the point where it's like, dude, it's just not worth, like, imagine the amount of time that you've spent just obsessing over this. Is it really worth like all of the pain that's the torment that it's causing you? Or is it just like these desires are so strong, and it's in such magnitude that I'm unable to comprehend the influence that this has on behavior. Whereas, someone who's not as driven sexually might be like, well, dude, you're just stop being such a horny bastard. It's just difficult to compare with no, I guess, quantifiable differences besides like, again, the proxy test of like testing testosterone and, I don't know, a semen sample or something. I don't know, whatever. Either way, I was just, very interested by people that do that. I suppose related to physical acumen, here's my next haiku. Fat people running, resistance training is best. For line one, I jest. This one also rhymes. Um, the whole thought that started this was that there's every city has these run clubs, right? And every city has people that jog around and they just kind of, and sometimes it looks like a road race, but sometimes they're just run clubs. Run clubs are generally a little smaller. Road races are, I'm less annoyed by road races. Road races are fine. Shut down the roads, people to run. It's good, whatever. But I think people get the wrong idea of what is going to happen. Like somebody that has no, has no conception of, strength training, or has no background in physical fitness whatsoever, which again shouldn't be like you shouldn't have to have studied exercise science to know like the basics of, how your body works. It's not like, I'm not putting it in the same category as like, well, you need to understand the history of the Roman Empire. It's like, no, you really don't. But the fact that you have a human body, you should know a little bit about how the body works, right? It's like you have it. Everyone has it. You have to live with it. And if you don't take care of it, it's just going to be your own problem anyway. So it behoove everybody to understand the human body, where it's like, it won't necessarily behoove everyone to understand the Roman Empire. It's like, sure, maybe it's like emblematic of, stuff happening now, but I can't make a strong argument for why everyone needs to study, ancient Greek philosophy. Some people just don't fucking care, and it's not gonna be helpful. It's like, fine, whatever. But I think the human body is this kind of an exception to that, in the sense that we all have one. We all have to like maintain it to some degree. It's not like, who doesn't eat or doesn't sleep. Like everyone does that. So it's in your best interest to understand it a little bit. But people that get into, exercise for the first time, maybe it's, maybe in their, again, in my opinion, very late, like in their 20s or 30s, they think that they're going to get like jacked running, which is just hilarious, because you see all these people in the run club, all of them look like they haven't exercised. And again, I'm not saying there aren't people that are in shape that are in run clubs, or that run a lot, or that people haven't gotten in shape running. People have. You can certainly get in shape and, be very healthy and run. Like, I'm not saying that these are mutually exclusive things, but the degree, like the amount of the percentage of people that are in run clubs that look like they're not in run clubs is very high. It's like 80% of people in, a run club would fool me, as people that were in run clubs, because it doesn't really, like, it doesn't add mass anywhere. It's like you're not going to get big legs running. Like, if anything, you're going to have skinnier legs, which if you have kind of this like, potato bod, having skinny legs is not going to help you. It's only going to make things worse. So if you really want, like, your legs to kind of match your physique, why are you running? You should not be running. You should be resistance training. And same with like even like fat burning. I know people like, sure, you burn more calories running, but I would argue that like people that, they don't understand how much effort it takes to actually burn calories. Like, not eating is such a more efficient way to lower your calorie intake than running, because in order for you to burn like like to eat 1,000 calories is like what, 1 pint of the ice cream that people eat. That's 1,000 calories. In order to burn that is like 11 hours on a bicycle, or like 4 hours. It's like a literal marathon to burn that off. And nobody's ever doing that. They're running, especially these beginner newbie runners, they're running like a mile and a half. And they're like, man, I'm exhausted. Now I can eat a big meal. And they eat like 600 extra calories. You're still going to gain weight and look like shit because you only burned like 200 maybe in that running. Whereas if you just ate less and, you, in my opinion, you should do resistance exercise, you could put on mass, which again, I think the caloric demands, the metabolic caloric demands, and not necessarily like the amount that you burn. You're going to burn more running. But I think if you put on more muscle requires more calories. Again, in the long term, if you have more muscle on your body, your maintenance calories will go up if you're more muscular. That's why bodybuilders' maintenance calories are really high. Now they're on steroids too. I understand that, but regardless, as a newbie person, like someone with more muscle, you're allowed to eat more calories because your body needs more of that to fill up the muscles, with glycogen, and there's a lot of chemistry and stuff that goes into it. But whereas you're running, you're not putting on any mass running, and you're only really muscularly exercising the lower body, but it's in an aerobic state, which is not going to add any mass. So you're not going to get any bigger, and your legs are only going to get skinnier. And sure, your midsection might get smaller because if you're in a calorie deficit. But I'd also argue just if you ate less, even if you like, I'm not going to run, I'm just going to sit here for an hour and not eat. You might actually be in better shape than if you went out and jogged a half a mile and then like made up for it by eating a burger, an extra patty on the burger or something like that. They're just not the same at all. So yeah, the whole point of this haiku is that the number of unhealthy runners I've seen is comically high. And I know there's a whole social dimension to running, and people like it because it's fun. You get to like talk to people, and like I don't want to talk and run. Okay, I don't like if I'm I I had a brief period of time where I ran competitively in high school, and I don't ever want to relive that. I did not like running, and it didn't really, my physique was not improved by running. And I wasn't like severely obese, and at that point just walking is fine. But I still think resistance exercise for your average Joe who's just looking to get in shape and look better and drop to 30 pounds, I think resistance exercise goes much farther than burning out of a running club, right? Because I don't know, I just like there was 3 times in a row where I would drive by the street and it's closed, and there's like 20 people that are obviously in the run club that are crossing the street, and I'm like, every single one of them besides like 3, if they told me they haven't exercised in the last 2 years, I would not blink, because like they don't look like it. They don't look, I'm not saying that's all about how you look, but I imagine, maybe it's not their primary motive, but one of the motivations for exercising at all is to maybe, look a little bit better in the mirror, even if it's just for you. It doesn't have to be, for Instagram, or, even for me driving by. That's not the point of it. And maybe all these people were even worse before they started the run club. I don't know. But none of them look to me like they're in excellent shape. Whereas, even these roided out bodybuilders that you see, at Planet Fitness or whatever, have, in my opinion, a stronger argument. Or like, damn, like he looks pretty fucking good. I'm not, no homo, but he looks like he lifts. If he told me that he hadn't exercised, I'd be like, no way, dude, you're jacked. Are you kidding me? Whereas any one of those people in the run club, with the skinny fat look, with the legs, like, it's just, you're not doing yourself any favors, right? And it doesn't mean you can eat, an extra, thing of lasagna or whatever. I don't know. Either way, the amount of people that are in run clubs that are unhealthy is bothering me. Let's see. I guess this is the last one. I'll just keep it quick. Let me move on so I can see it. Yeah, let's move back to one. Chuckle with meaning between apathy and fear. Laughtivism might work. So there's this concept that I was introduced to called laughtivism, which is like, again, a kind of a bridge between activism and laughing. And of course, I appreciate humor in all of its different forms. I mostly am, I guess, the sarcastic, the satire is one that I appreciate the most. But laughtivism being something that you can support a cause through whatever way you find entertaining. And to me, this is much more compelling than like genuine activism. Meaning like, oh, show up to your picket rally and make a sign and give the $5 you have left to some the Red Cross who's going to help or something. That to me is not really like a compelling like way to make change. Whereas I think, doing things that, like for example, me making a meme about how bad Windows is. It's funny to me, and of course, but the activism component of that is telling you how bad Windows is. And to me, I think that is, a more meaningful and again more entertaining and fun way, and more engaging way for me to get involved with some kind of activist thing, right? And I'm not saying that anyone has to do any of this. You don't have to be an activist of any kind, but I imagine, if you dig down deep enough, everyone has one or two things, or maybe a lot, that you truly like you give a fuck about. And in my case, technology, for better or worse, is something that I am unraveled in, and I, have ties, and I, I care about it, to a certain extent. So and there's a lot of ways in which like I think activism would be annoying, like me going outside of Google's headquarters and being like, "You guys got to stop, stop collecting data. People, you're being mean to people." Like that is not going to do anything, Whereas if I, go outside dressed up as, I don't know, Gemini AI bot and start answering questions like a jackass, like that is funny to me, And it's like, sure, like I guess I'm kind of making, the difference I'm making, is just really getting people to laugh at, like, and maybe just think a little bit, right? And that's maybe that's my whole, my whole like foray into like trying to make things funny or entertaining at all, is just, you know, there's a maybe even just like a moment of thought after you laugh at something where it's like, me pretending to be ChatGPT or something, or sitting in a box and answering questions like I'm AI, and I guess, giving you whatever the AI is doing. I could figure out some way to make it funny, probably, for me at least. But if there's even a moment of like thought afterwards, I wonder why, why is this person doing that? Or like, why am I laughing? Is this funny? Or why is this so relatable to me? And it's like, oh, maybe because this, these companies suck ass, and they shouldn't have all the power that they have, and maybe I should do something about, all my dependencies on Google. Even just that moment of thought to me, I think is more compelling than, again, me making a fool of myself, dumping a paint on, Google's steps or something like that, or, soaking a software engineer in black paint, I don't know, I mean, I don't know. There's just a lot of ways about regular activism I think is stupid. So this like concept of laughtivism is a little bit more, my speed, I would say, by someone that appreciates the satire and the funny, ways of looking at things. Because I just can't like taking anything too serious as, is gay. No. But people don't, I mean, we're not really a generation, at least Generation Z is not one that is like, people kind of laugh at people that take things serious, which is its own problem. I'll talk about that maybe more next time. But regardless, yeah, people don't really like people that take things serious. But anyway, I'll leave that for next time. Anyway, thanks for watching. Peace out. I'll see you next time.